I was talking to JJ McCullough the other day, and he's a conservative political YouTuber here. And something I said in passing, there's a lot of truth to it, is that some of these questions about democracy, you can kind of sharpen your teeth for biting into the subject by really studying, really working on, really examining, really working with an utterly non-democratic society. If you don't have that contrast, if you don't really have the lived experience of what democracy is not, perhaps you suffer all your life with a little bit of excess vagueness when thinking about precisely what democracy is, how it works, and what the advantages are. It's not that you learn this by examining the disadvantages of a non-democratic society, but it whets your appetite. It sharpens your claws. What can I tell you? I used to live in a tropical paradise called the Lao People's Democratic Republic, commonly known as Laos. Contrary to the name, there is absolutely nothing democratic about Laos. There was a story I heard, and I only was able to hear it because it was told to me by someone who was a direct witness, a witness to and participant in these events. This absolutely never would have appeared in the newspapers there or on the radio. To discuss this would be strictly forbidden. It was a school teacher who got all her kids organized for Earth Day. Depending where you've lived, it's possible you've never even heard of Earth Day. Earth Day is one of these phony United Nations promoted. Did you celebrate Earth Day in Detroit? Really? Okay, Melissa knows Earth Day. So, right, but it's the day when everyone's supposed to care about the environment a little bit extra. And the kids, for their school project, made up different big signs on Bristol board, we'd say, placards, right? So some kind of cardboard backing with different slogans about saving the planet and saving the environment, saving the whales and helping the dolphins, whatever it was they had in mind. Each kid had to do a little bit of research and make a sign. And then they marched together from the school to the nearest Buddhist temple. It's not a very long walk. And I imagine one of the reasons for this was just that the Buddhist temple had a kind of yard where they could assemble and do this exercise. Largely meaningless, educational endeavor. Wasn't thought of as political, wasn't thought of as a protest by the teacher or by the students themselves. Well, guess what? The police reacted immediately. In the time it took these kids to walk a few city blocks from the school to the Buddhist temple, the Communist Party leapt into action. They were all arrested. They were all taken to the police station. Every single placard, every single school project on Bristol board that we held up was photographed, documented, translated, because most of them were in English. I think there was some Laotian, but this is mostly an English language exercise. Every single student's name and telephone number was written down. Their parents were got in contact with. Their ID cards were taken, right? If you think the way to influence politics in the People's Democratic Republic of Laos is by having a street protest, is by having a street demonstration, you are sorely mistaken. In telling this bizarre anecdote, one point is to say to you that if I, as a white Western foreigner, had got it into my mind that the way for me to influence government policy was to motivate a bunch of friends and strangers to hold up placards and march in the street chanting, right? All of us would have gone to jail. And we would have gone to jail for nothing. It would have accomplished nothing. Now, do you know what I did when I was lost? I did influence Lao government policy on forestry. I did influence Lao government policy on the environment. I wrote an article that was published in both Thai and English, not Laotian, but everyone in the Lao educated elite can read Thai. And I know that that article got read by basically each and every person in the Lao government leadership at the elite level. It's a small country. Word gets around. It's a small country, and everyone who controls the country lives in one small town in Vientiane. I'm 6 degrees of separation from these people. And I didn't publish it in Laos. I published it in Thailand, in both English and Thai. And that article, if you go back and read it today, I don't think you would get the impression that I was pro-communist. I don't think you'd get the impression that I was in favor of what the Lao Communist Party is doing in terms of their record on the environment, or specifically deforestation. That was really the big deal there, was cutting down the forest. Okay. But that article was very carefully written to say, look, this country is led by poverty-stricken, ignorant people who don't know any better. And guess whose advice they're taking? They're taking the advice of the United Nations and of a small number of donor countries like France, Germany, and the United States of America. And those white Western powers are giving them terrible advice. And that's why the forest is being cut down. This country is being irreparably harmed. Right? Once the forest is cut down, there's nothing else here, folks. Once that forest is cut down, there is no tourist attraction in Laos. Once the forest is cut down and the topsoil goes away, this is going to be a desolate, poverty-stricken country with nothing left to sell. And it doesn't come back. It's not going to regenerate once the forest is clear cut. Once the jungle is gone, once the biodiversity is lost, this country is a poverty-stricken parking lot. Nobody wants to pay to park it. Okay, it's going to be empty in a sense the people of Laos can't imagine. I didn't say it's not your fault, the government of Laos. Right? That's not what I said. Right? But it says some interesting things. It says, for example, the problem is not illegal logging. Whatever the government decides to do is the law. I was speaking to the people in power. I was speaking to them in a way they would understand. And it wasn't confronting them needlessly. But that's saying, I know the problem isn't illegal logging. I know the problem is legal logging. I know the problem is you. I know the problem is members of the Communist Party and their families doing the logging. It's you guys directly profiting from it, right? And I was asking the question, whose advice are you following? Okay, that was a kind of protest. That was a kind of lobbying. That was a kind of political activism. And I didn't go to jail. And I would say I had influence vastly out of proportion to my power. I worked a job that paid less than minimum wage. I had a bachelor's degree in political science. Okay, I made a difference that I never could have made by holding up a placard, by chanting, by singing songs in the streets, through the types of activism that continue to be glorified in the American mind's eye. So, guys, this is a live stream. It's not a pre-recorded video. I'm happy to see you all here in the audience. Frida asks, did the donations come with exhortations to Laos to be more democratic? So it's a strangely worded question, but you're actually getting at a very interesting point here, all right? From the start of this humble video, and I've been talking about this on YouTube for maybe 7 years, at least 6 years now, right? Okay. I was talking about the ways in which lobbying or activism can have positive outcomes. But there's another question that Frida's getting at. What if the real point of activism is to get donations for the activist, right? And if that is the point, maybe going to jail is the best thing you can do. Maybe a completely counterproductive stunt that accomplishes nothing but puts you in jail, makes you look like a victim, gets you into the newspaper headlines. Oh, yeah, you can imagine if I had done, well-intentioned left-wing liberal environmentalist, vegan, Buddhist scholar from Toronto thrown in prison in Laos for protesting against logging. Or let's say it's something more protesting because he's trying to save the last of this endangered species. I can now name several endangered species that were disappearing in Laos at the time. Okay. So if it's about donations, right? And where's the fundraising happening? Maybe the donation, maybe it's back in Toronto. Maybe I have a friend from college who is a journalist at the Toronto Star. And I'm directly emailing that journalist saying, hey, make sure this gets into the newspapers in Canada. I'm a Canadian from Toronto, and I'm here being put in prison because I dared to challenge the government about logging. Yes. So now a whole different sort of strategic mentality emerges. If what we're talking about is not democracy, if what we're talking about is money. Oh, we have some people in the audience who know what's up. So Natasha has just written, "That is so true!" Exclamation point. Rachel Ziegler from DXE is a perfect example. DXE is an abbreviation of Direct Action Everywhere. She got veneers and hasn't worked a full-time job since moving to California. So to my knowledge, and this is based on interviews Rachel has done, she was a waitress, and she now has her rent and so on, her cost of living paid for by Direct Action Everywhere. So Direct Action Everywhere, they get more than $1 million in donations. From the most recent data I've seen, it may be closer to $2 million in donations per annum. So year after year, it's more than $1 million. I think $1.8 million thereabouts as the most recent data I've seen. And out of that money, they can indeed pay for many people like Rachel to, shall we say, live off the fat of the land, live off the generosity of the donors. So yeah, I mean, this is one of those things. It's shallow and it's deep at the same time. So I've been talking to this other YouTuber, Cranky Vegan, right? So I am not going to disclose the details of what we talked about or of what he said. It just seems to be inappropriate. However, I also think it would be kind of silly or counterproductive to pretend that he and I don't talk at all, or like we don't know each other or something. You know what I mean? So there's discourse going on about this. All right. What I find most troubling, and this happens throughout democracy, this happens on the left, this happens on the right, this happens in the center. It is not just a vegan issue. This is a profound problem with democracy across the board, is that people fictionalize history and then stand around pompously and self-righteously demanding, why haven't you learned the lessons of history, right? So they create a fiction that street protests ended the Vietnam War, that people holding a little sign and standing in the streets chanting, that's what ended the Vietnam War. Oh yeah. What ended the war in Iraq? What ended the war in Afghanistan? Oh, I'm sorry, it's 2021. And those wars haven't ended yet. What ended the war in Palestine between Israel and Palestinians? Is it a lack? Oh, is it a lack of street protests? Was that the problem? Did people not stand in the street holding a sign enough? Did they not? Was it not enough pamphlets? Well, we have this scientific evidence, right? Cranky Vegan, the YouTuber, also Direct Action Everywhere, also Extinction Rebellion, all kinds of people say, oh, there's scientific proof that these methods work. The largest street protest in the history of planet Earth was in the year 2003. We all lived through it. In the year 2003, anti-war protests opposed to the Americans invading and bombing Iraq. You got scientific proof that that works, huh? In 2003, you set the Guinness World Record. There were marches in Europe, there were marches in the United States, there were marches around the world against that war in the year 2003. Here we are in 2021, and the war isn't over yet. All right? People fictionalize history. They manufacture false facts to make it seem that the theory is effective in practice. Okay? And this theory is not falsifiable. This theory of political progress, the pursuit of social change through protest, and more specifically, through so-called disruption, right? That's what Direct Action Everywhere support, and that is also what Cranky Vegan supports. Okay. Wayne Seong, when he launched Direct Action Everywhere, what he promised was that they were going to be different from every other activist movement in the history of animal rights and veganism, because they were going to use methods that had been proven to be effective by social science research. I'm sorry, but this is exactly the same thing I hear from Cranky Vegan still to this day. So he just made a video yesterday or the day before yesterday in which he says, just after the 8-minute mark, and he says this kind of thing all the time. He said that in the video the week before also. He's a guy who does one video a week. He says, oh, it's not just me saying this. It's been proven in one scientific study after another. And, he doesn't actually read the scientific studies. He doesn't actually quote them. He doesn't actually examine the examples and question to what extent these do or do not support his case. Oh, yeah. I mean, just look at the Arab Spring. So we're now in 2021, all right? When Wayne Seong came out with that argument, this is a proven scientific fact. It's scientifically proven that this form of disruption, this form of peaceful, nonviolent activism, that this works. They pointed to the Arab Spring as a great success story. The Arab Spring was a disaster, and it was a disaster most of all for the people who were part of the protests themselves. It ruined their lives. They died. They went to prison. Okay. Now, I already mentioned, I am not going to disclose anything that Cranky Vegan has ever said to me privately. All right. However, I'm going to talk about some things that he said publicly because he's made a lot of YouTube videos himself. And most of what I know about the guy, frankly, everything I know about the guy is from seeing interviews he gave to other YouTube channels. It's not from private discussions he had with me. So this is stuff that's on the internet. And I would suspect he's also done interviews with podcasts. And some of those have been seen by very few people. One of the interviews with him I saw, I think it had 50 views or less. And I remember asking him, I said, look, is this a secret interview? Because this has so few views. Like if you promoted this on your own channel, more people would hear it. Well, what's the deal with this? Okay. Cranky Vegan's claim to fame is that he went to jail. Okay. So he knows how the world really works. He knows what's really effective in political activism because he went to jail for his convictions. Now, there is an emotional, irrational sense in which we all know where he's coming from. And we all feel, oh, if you care about this enough, if you're committed about this enough that, you're willing to go to prison for it, suddenly everyone takes you more seriously. Now, I would point out that this is emotional and irrational and wrong. Okay. What did he go to jail for? Every single time I've heard him discuss this, or I've seen it in writing, it's a transcript of an interview he gave, okay, he lies. In the same way that Wayne Seong from Direct Action Everywhere lies about Gandhi. Yeah, I mean Mohandas Gandhi, the leader from India. In the same way that Wayne Seong lies about protests against the Vietnam War and protests against the Iraq War and the Arab Spring, in the same way that each and every positive example given by activists who preach or practice disruption is a lie. Okay. Cranky Vegan, in discussing his own autobiography, is also lying. He's manufacturing a positive example to support his form, his methodology, his approach to activism. Whereas if you actually examine the case, if you actually look at it, it's a negative example. It's a counterexample. It's an example that proves my point, not his point. And part of my point is, don't go to jail. All you lovely people in the audience right now, do not go to jail. You want to go to jail for 5 years? You want to be checking in? They do this thing where after you've served your time, you have to keep checking in, where they check that you're employed and you got some kind of probation officer or somebody checking up on you, make sure you don't have any illegal weapons, make sure you're not using drugs and so on, where you remain under state control for a long time afterwards. Don't go to jail, okay? If we're going to have a discussion about how to bring democracy to Laos, how to bring democracy to Cambodia, how to bring democracy to Hong Kong, how to bring democracy to Canada, how to bring democracy to the United States, okay? Any methodology that begins by taking your best and brightest and hardest working people and putting them in jail is a methodology I find fault with, okay? That does not seem like a terribly effective methodology to me, all right? The movement he was a part of is referred to as Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, SHAC. So people refer to it as SHAC, all right? I used to live in Cambridge, England. I met and spoke to people on both sides of that debate, on both sides of that movement, while I was in England. Before I left to live in Laos and Cambodia and do all those exciting things, back when I lived in Toronto, Canada, when would this have been? 1998, 1999, I read the animal rights extremist publications of the day. I read the Oxford Green Anarchist. I've mentioned this before. And they covered that case in minute detail And I think the senior editor and founder of that publication, he literally went to prison for that too. He definitely went to court. I think he was never sentenced, but he was in court and in and out of, temporary holding cells and so on. But I think in the end he was acquitted. So I'm sorry, it's not that he went to jail, but he was in and out of court for a long time for that case. So he was passionately and directly involved, and other people were writing in. So I got to read this minute coverage of what went on with SHAC and how the cookie crumbled on that. So there was a case, it partly took place in England, it partly took place in the United States. All right. Every single interview, every single statement I have seen from Cranky Vegan, he makes the claim that they shut down Huntington Animal Labs, what do you say, Huntington Vivisection Laboratories, the laboratories in England where these experiments were performed on animals, and that they somehow turned like the public will, like democratic will, against this wealthy corporation that's based there. That is a lie on top of a lie on top of a lie. And you can debunk it if you just look up Huntington Life Sciences on Wikipedia and read about what happened to that company. That is one of the most successful companies in Cambridge, England. It's not in the city, in the greater Cambridge area. It's one of the most successful companies in all the United Kingdom. They went from strength to strength. They were fantastically successful during this time. And they were powerfully connected to Cambridge University. Now, that's not their only client, but they have many, many clients at Cambridge, people doing legitimate, leading edge, brilliant science. And whenever they were challenged by these animal rights activists, they were able to call those people in. Like, it would appear in newspaper articles. I remember once they did a pro-vivisection protest. I'm not kidding you. In the history of the world, that might be the only one. In Cambridge, England, Huntington Life Sciences, well, it wasn't the company, but one of their supporters organized. And all these scientists came out and they said, this is a good company. What they do is crucially important to our research. And they were able to name off all these legitimate scientific research projects at Cambridge, and scientists came forward and talked about their experience. And they said, yeah, I'm researching the cure to this disease, and we paid them to do this research, and this is the reality, and these are the guidelines about torturing animals to death that they have to follow. And there was a huge groundswell of democratic public support for Huntington Life Sciences. It has since changed its name. Sorry, that was part of it. I forget if they were purchased by a larger company, they had a merger or something, but they did have a rebranding. They changed the name. But that same facility, that same company, it is, and so you just look at how many thousand people they employ. They were a huge employer. They're a huge success story. That is partly because they have a proven track record of doing research, yes, for corporations, but universities like Cambridge and Oxford, which are not that far apart, by the way. Cambridge, I took the bus between Cambridge and Oxford a few times. Cambridge is not really one university. It's many small universities in a cluster. So these different departments and labs and agencies in Cambridge, each one of which contracts with this laboratory for animal research, for experiment, for whatever kind of thing it is they're doing. There was a huge amount of public support. They were a huge success. It is not true that Cranky Vegan or anyone who was part of the SHAC movement accomplished something great or permanent through their protest. What they accomplished was putting themselves in jail. Okay, they did not they did not disrupt that company in any way. They disrupted their own lives. I'm going to pause and look at the. Okay, so we have an interesting error in the audience. So DDP, all right, DDP, you got it wrong. All right, I don't know who you are, DDP. No, it's so you have said that it's Mahatma Gandhi. Well, you have neither studied Sanskrit nor Pali, old boy. Mahatma is not a name. Mahatma, it's a title. Okay, Mohandas Gandhi is his name. Mahatma is a title. Okay, you thought I mispronounced Mahatma? Please, who do you think you're dealing with here? Aren't I always talking about Sanskrit and Pali etymology? Come on. Sanskrit and Prakrit here. Come on. What kind of YouTube channel do you think this is? But no, I mean, it's a big deal. The way in which figures like Gandhi are made into mythological representations that are convenient for the particular political agenda people are driving on the 21st century, and it totally represents who they really were and what really happened. We have a profound question here. Do you shave your head?
You've made a video about
Yeah, I have, haven't I? Yeah. That was my popular demand too. At that time, a bunch of people, there were some questions about that. There were some questions about masculinity and shaving one's head and what attitude one should take towards. That's a couple of years ago now, but yeah, that's right. So if you search my YouTube channel, you know, okay. So Sam says on Patreon, Cranky Vegan has 334 patrons receiving $1,736 per month, and he then says jail pays, I guess. Okay, so this is a digression. But he does not actually use that money for himself, interestingly or not. What he does on Patreon is he collects donations, and then he donates each month all of those donations to an animal sanctuary or some animal rights charity. And I believe the patrons vote on it. I don't know to what extent it's done randomly or democratically, but he has some kind of discussion with people. He says, okay, so out of these 4, who do you want to donate it to? So it's a very peculiar exercise, but there is a lot of support for him. And look, we are the last of the white elephants here, people. I mean, there are very, very few talented, hardworking people talking about vegan politics in 2021, and I appreciate that he's doing the work he does. And I'm not surprised people want to donate money to him. Now, you know, meanwhile, you've just heard me point out, Earthling Ed earns much more than $100,000 a year. Earthling Ed, just through Patreon alone, it's more than $100,000 a year, and this is not the only source of income. So there are people making a lot of money out of the vegan movement, but to my knowledge, Cranky Vegan is not one of them. Now, that being said, do I know what his day job is? No, he never mentions it. Something I said to him in our discussion, I said, look, I don't know anything about your intellectual background. I don't know what books he reads. I don't know what books he's ever read. I don't know what he studied in university, like ever. Like, I don't know what he studied just in the last 5 years. You know what I mean? I don't have any sense of his intellectual background or interest. You know, on my channel over time, but even in this one video, you get some sense. Okay, this is a guy who has a background in studying Buddhist philosophy. This is a guy who has a background in studying ancient Greek. And, you know, by the way, I did not learn ancient Greek. Ancient Greek sources in English translation. You know, you quickly or slowly start to realize what it is I'm reading at any one time. When I'm not physically holding up the books on camera and telling you about what I'm reading, you get a sense of the intellectual background, what is I'm researching, and who I am. You don't get that with Cranky Vegan. And, you know, fair enough. Everyone's playing the game by different rules. But when you have this sort of question, and I'll come back to it after I'm done reading and responding to your comments, you know, I have a conflict between you and I can say, you know, a real question of strategy, tactics, morality. I mean, there are matters of principle here as well as matters of pragmatics, right? I'm talking to someone where in every important way, they're just totally unknown to me because I don't know those things, because he doesn't share that stuff. He doesn't give you some sense of who he is, you know, ethically, intellectually, philosophically, or even politically. I've never heard him talk about Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or, you know, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Donald Trump and how he feels about those things. You know, so you really don't get that. Now, why is that? I would say it's because he comes out of a violent background. You know, I'm not saying he's currently violent, but he came out of a more extreme form of animal rights activism. I have seen him endorsing and approving of illegal and violent methods of protest that I do not approve of on my channel, that I harshly criticize and tell people not to do on my channel. So that may give you a reason, maybe even if you're not aware of it. Like, maybe you don't consciously think, I'm going to come on camera and be evasive about my background, intellectually, personally, professionally. Maybe it's just you're aware that you're playing with fire. You're doing something dangerous, that he's endorsing terrorism. Ultimately, he's endorsing crimes against property and so on and so forth. That he is constantly endorsing breaking into laboratories and breaking into farms and breaking into slaughterhouses and stealing the animals out of them. This kind of disruption. Yeah. So-called quote unquote open rescue and this kind of thing, which again puts him in the same camp with Wayne Seong. And Wayne Seong has had many, many criminal charges posed against him. To my knowledge, he's never been convicted. That one way or another, he gets out of jail, so to speak. That one way or another, he's acquitted or the charges are dropped. But nevertheless, there are people who keep breaking the law this way, and direct action everywhere in that camp. So if you guys have been watching my channel for a long time, I'm not in that camp. Now, there are many reasons for that. One is democracy, but another is talent is scarce. Don't spend 5 years in a cage. Like, you know, you're wasting the opportunities that we have in a democracy and that people don't have in Laos and don't have in Cambodia and don't have in Hong Kong and don't have in Myanmar. hey guys, if you believe in disruption, if you believe in direct action, if you believe in these protests, the war in Iraq should have ended in 2003. And little Myanmar should have, open and free and fair elections. Do you think, let me ask you this honestly, okay, so this is a series of questions that answer themselves here, guys. Do you think that veganism will ever be able to organize a protest as disruptive as what the people of Myanmar just organized in 2021, in all the months of 2021? The pro-democracy movement in Myanmar versus the vegan movement in California. Who has more numbers? Who has more passion? Who is going to have more outcomes? Who can point to? So if this works, if this method works, it should work 10,000 times better for those disruptive protesters in Myanmar than it is working for so-called disruptive protesters in the name of veganism, in the name of ecology, so on and so forth. Parallel question for you. Do you think that vegans in the United States of America, do you even think that vegans in the state of California will ever have the numbers, will ever have the money, will ever have the organization, or will ever have the level of passion behind them as the anti-abortion protesters? If you believe that disruptive activism is effective, if you believe this kind of activism is effective, then the anti-abortion movement in the last 50 years should have been 10,000 times more effective than vegan activism today, or than vegan activism ever has been in the past or ever could be in the future. Veganism as a movement will never have the advantages of the Burmese pro-democracy movement, of the pro-democracy movement in Myanmar, or of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, in case you've been sleeping through the news for the past 2 years, right? Never. We'll never have those numbers. We'll never have that much money. We'll never have that much passion. We'll never have that much organization. Never. Not today, not tomorrow, not in the year 2050. Never. So if this methodology can't work for them, why do you think it can work for us? We will never have the level of backing, the level of interest, the level of support that the anti-abortion lobby has. The anti-abortion, just compare institution by institution. The anti-abortion lobby has it all, okay? They have high-paid, expensive lawyers in Washington, D.C. They have foundations of that kind. They have complete lunatics. They have rednecks who are ready to kill and die. They have like the most extreme violent protesters imaginable, right? They have the full spectrum. They've been causing disruption constantly. And they have no shame, right? They think they're on a mission from God. They'll show up. They will disrupt all 5 points of disruption. They will pay for airtime. I don't know if you've seen this. They will pay for advertisements on TV about abortion, right? They will pay for posters. They will pay for, like professional advertising, huge billboards, right? Sure, right? They'll do that, right? They will also show up at the abortion clinic. They will show up at Congress. They will show up at the state legislature, at City Hall, okay? The level of success represented by this failed movement is so many levels higher than anything vegans ever have accomplished, ever would, could, or will accomplish. But it has failed. And you know what the chart to look up is? I've posted on YouTube before, so you can go watch my old video about this if you want to see the actual chart. Number of abortions per capita per annum in the United States of America, okay? Because ultimately, just like eating meat, just like buying meat, whether or not people have abortions is a personal choice. Right? Even if it's illegal in your state, you can choose to go to another state. You can choose to go to Canada or Mexico or Europe. Most of the time you cross state lines from an anti-abortion state to a pro-abortion state if you want to. Ultimately, it is a matter of personal choice. And the number of abortions in the United States of America per person per year has not declined. On the contrary, I talked about this before, where it has declined, the cause had nothing to do with all of this activism. Instead, the cause had to do with multiculturalism, that you have huge numbers of people moving to the United States of America who are Latin American, Central American, Eastern European, Chinese, Japanese. They come from other cultures that are more opposed to abortion on that personal level than white, Anglican Americans are, than white Protestant Americans are. They have a much less relaxed attitude towards that. I won't digress to a big thing with that. A lot of people don't realize that about Chinese culture. You may know about, say, Catholics from Central America and Latin America. That may be the stereotype. Oh, yeah, those people will refuse to get abortions unless they absolutely have to have one. Guess what? The Chinese also are really set against abortion. You have an increasingly multicultural. Okay. So I'm asking seriously, okay? As a matter of strategy, as a matter of tactics, as a matter of morality, as a matter of principle, as a matter of practice, why would vegans imitate what is already a failed paradigm used by anti-abortion protesters and used in Hong Kong, in Myanmar, in opposing the Vietnam War, in opposing the war in Iraq, in myriad examples? So I'll just say, again, I'm not going to read out any of this stuff we said, but at one point, Cranky Vegan was asking me to clarify what my position was. Totally appropriate. I have no complaints, by the way, but it's conducting this debate or discussion. Right? And I said to him, no. I think you've really misunderstood what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is 50-50. I'm not saying it's 60-40. Like, I'm not saying that your method and direct action everywhere's method, that this protest assertion, I'm not saying it works half of the time. And I'm not saying it works 40% of the time. I'm saying it works 0% of the time. I am actually making the claim that this is a bad method. Like, it's not about relative effectiveness. This is a total nihilistic rejection of exactly the kind of politics you have dedicated your life towards, and you are still dedicating your life on YouTube to propounding and encouraging others to do. It's not that I think it's 10% less effective than something else, right? Or 50% less effective. I am saying this is 0 effective. And you know what the effect is? It puts people like you in jail. It ruins your life. Right? People's lives really do get ruined by this form of political activism. Right? So guys, I'm going back to looking at the comments. Okay, so Natasha says it's all ego with social activism, just functioning as a quasi-religion. They're about self-expression and group affiliation, period. Narcissists. Okay, look, so here I'm going to argue against, my position for a moment. So if you were to ask me, you didn't ask me, but if you were to ask me, what positive do I see in this type of organization, whether that be Direct Action Everywhere or Anonymous for the Voiceless, or even PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And let's be clear. Wayne Xiong, when he founded Direct Action Everywhere, said that he was going to do something bold and new and different than what anyone had done before, because his methods were based on social science research. They were proven to be effective by science, as a matter of science. And Cranky Vegan on his YouTube channel is still saying this to this day. He's still saying, oh, scientific facts, can't argue. It's not me saying this. It's not my opinion. The reality is all that Wayne Xiong has done is reinvented exactly the same methods used by PETA, by People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. PETA, 40 years ago, took blood and had a woman in a bikini pouring blood on herself. Wayne Xiong's Direct Action Everywhere in 2020, 2021, woman in a bikini pouring blood on herself. They're the same methods. Everything they said they were against when they found it, they have gone on to do exactly that. So this is one overall problem, okay? But if I were to argue against my position, replying to this comment from Natasha here, people need friends. And these protests, I don't think they work as protests. I don't think they are protests, really. I don't think they have their stated objectives, but they do work as a kind of rally. They do work as a kind of conference. They do work as a kind of support group where you can meet like-minded people. That's the most common thing. Shout out to Henya Mania, who's barely alive in 2021. She's just barely clinging to her sanity and her heartbeat. But back in the day, I remember she just said, honestly, she used to go to vegan protests to get laid. She'd go to meet her next boyfriend or her next girlfriend. She was there. Now, so when you say this, it's functioning as a quasi-religion. Okay, people go to church to get laid. People go to church to find the person they're going to marry, to find someone like, they do. People go to synagogue to get laid. I don't know if people go to Buddhist temple to get laid. Good luck with that. But look, so I have some sympathy for the devil there. Like if you say this is a quasi-religion for people, well, a lot of people need religion. A lot of people need those sources of community and friendship. And you may live a life where you are the only vegan you know. And then when you go to an activist event like that, you get to meet some like-minded people. That is the most positive and the most flattering thing I can say about it. Now, if any of you try it, you're going to figure out that guys like me and guys like Cranky Vegan, we're really scarce. We're really rare. We're really precious. You're going to go to these events and meet the people who are there and go, whoa, talent is scarce. There are a lot of people at this protest who couldn't sit in a microphone and give any kind of coherent account about what it is we're trying to accomplish here in this movement. So there are a lot of frighteningly stupid people that you're going to meet. Yeah, and frighteningly immoral people too. You're going to meet terrible people going to protest. So it's not all fun and games, but it is partly fun and games. There's some possibility to there's some possibility to really meet like-minded people and start something meaningful that way. Yeah, so we have a complaint here about Planned Parenthood. Yes, the history of Planned Parenthood also, if you look into their founder, so I'll finish that sentence. The history of that organization, including the actual life and writings of the founder, for example, what she wrote to Adolf Hitler, her involvement with eugenics. There are reasons to raise questions about Planned Parenthood. I made several videos talking about Planned Parenthood in relation to gender reassignment surgery, and there are important questions to be asked there. But for Americans, one of the most important questions of all is just, why is this a private business? And I say business rather than charity because this is currently being debated in the Senate. They actually receive government funding from the Small Business Administration. Well, that means you're a business. And it was disqualified. Nobody knows how the story ends yet, but it was challenged because part of the claim was, well, they don't count as a small business. They're a big business. They have more than 10,000 employees, so they shouldn't have qualified this. But why would this not be a government function? This is part of the fundamental question. If you believe that people should have access to abortions, why would they get it through a charity or a private company or a business? If access to abortion is not going to be based on your wealth, it's not based on your ability to pay, but it's something open to everyone equally. That's something that perhaps poorer people and drug addicts need, especially like people who really don't have money and may not even have all their identity cards. You know what I mean? You can have someone who's a homeless drug addict. And they don't really have the paperwork even to access conventional government services. If you're going to make abortions available for the people who need it the most, obviously that's going to be a government, responsibility. I feel this way too. When we talk about some things in education and so on, it's like there's a point of diminishing returns. Like, look, you can't expect the church to do this. Anyway, it's a digression, but I'm interested in this person raising this time. Frida comments that she remembers reading about the Jehovah's Witnesses' failed methods to recruit believers by creating a sense of belonging with the members. Yeah. So I was involved with cult studies for quite a while. And if you Google that, you'll definitely at least get some written articles I did related to cult studies. Maybe just a couple of YouTube videos touch on that in passing. But that's an area of research I've really appreciated and benefited from my whole life. And maybe 6 months ago, I was talking to a professor again about the possibility of my getting a PhD in that area, in cult studies. Cult studies, the study of what cults do and what works and what doesn't, what's a disaster with them. It's instructive also in this way. I mean, I said at the beginning of this video, when you study a completely non-democratic society, it gives you some insight into how democracies work also. There's a lot for us to learn from what cults are doing wrong, put it that way. But yeah, very few people evaluate what it is that cults are doing that's effective, how it is they work. So yeah, I did just within this last year, partly shout out to my book. This is actually discussed in a couple chapters of No More Manifestos. And I did quite a bit of research on a few different cult groups. There's several things in the book that are discussed very briefly, but I did a significant amount of research on. And I talked to a few professors connected to some of these strange cults for that reason. But, I would just say, so someone's just encouraging me, saying I should make videos on cult psychology. Well, I have. So Natasha, I have done formal research and writing about that. And it's something, so when I first started the channel, this channel was called Abat le Ciel, my main channel. I assumed I was going to be doing dialogues with atheist channels, with anti-religion activists. And I wanted to talk about Buddhism and cult-like aspects of Buddhism and so on. There was a lot I wanted to deal with. But sure, also just completely non-Buddhist, crazy cults. There's all kinds of stuff I'd love to deal with. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, that's not what I'm doing with my time and energy. And if I return to full-time studies at the university here, then, that's very unlikely to be a significant part of the content of the channel. Also, I mean, by the way, you can look at what I'm reading, because we're doing weekly book review videos, and you can look at what I'm planning to read. So, look, I'm just being honest with you. I would love to do more research on that. I would love to do more videos on that. One of the reasons why that didn't happen on the channel was that nobody would cooperate with me. And if you look at my interactions with atheist YouTubers, so yeah, Matt Dillahunty is being mentioned. I think I got an email back from him at one point. I think I got one reply from Matt. But no, for years and years, I reached out to atheist YouTubers, anti-religion YouTube, and podcasts. Sorry, it's not all YouTube. Some of it podcasts, other forms of activism, and it's very disappointing. I mean, I believe I never once got anyone who would even just talk to me, and there are a lot of bad things to say. There are a lot of bad things to say about the reality of what atheist activism is. Certainly in 2021, and it's come downhill a long way since 2016. Okay, so some nice, helpful, and largely irrelevant comments and questions here. But let's just wrap up the topic of this video. Look, politics is not entirely about right and wrong. Politics is in large part about whether or not people care, and I think if you guys are listening to the, message of this video as a whole, even if a few moments I'm kind of angry and ranting, I've quoted in context, you can tell I care. I mean, I've been coming on YouTube talking about this for 7 years because I care. And before YouTube, I was already on the internet because I care. I remember there was a young woman. I knew her for something like 3 years over the internet, never met face to face. And every time I was talking to her about vegan activism and slaughterhouses, whatever, I was saying to her, stay out of jail. Don't do this, And she had rage issues. And yes, you could see it in stupid comments she made on the internet. And most people laughed at it because she was a woman too. People were like, oh, she's just a girl. She doesn't actually mean she's going to hurt somebody. Yes, she does. Because I knew her well enough to know. And I remember one of our conversations, I started that way. I said, look, I see this stuff you're saying on the internet. I see other people think it's a joke, but I know it's not. Like, I know you. I don't know her that well, but I know you well enough to know what's going on. This is really what you're about, when you're going to get yourself put in prison. And this is, and also this is wrong. I mean, this is terrorism. I mean, I think it's bad and evil and wrong and counterproductive. Okay, I'll continue with the anecdote of that young woman for a second. Okay, but look, here's what it says. There were protests in England about 1 week ago now, and Cranky Vegan discussed them on his YouTube channel, all right? And the main method used was blocking the roads that allowed people to access certain slaughterhouses, processing centers, distribution centers. I think it was actually the distribution centers, really, not where the animals were slaughtered, but I think after it was packaged, when the meat was sent out to McDonald's restaurants, okay? Okay, so this was, in one sense, effective, right? Like, they blocked the roads, and for a couple of days, McDonald's supply chain didn't work. There wasn't enough meat. Now, really, what would be the sign that vegan activism is effective? When you look at the chart of how many pounds of beef, how many pounds of chicken, how many pounds of pork, how many pounds of fish every American is eating per capita per year. When you look at the chart, it's an easy chart to get. You can get it right now. United Nations publishes those statistics, but many sources on the internet, you can get this. Okay. When you look at that chart, the numbers would be going down, right? What would be the sign, the signal that anti-abortion activism is working? when you look at the chart of number of abortions per capita, that the number is going down, right? Anything else is failure, right? And with something like veganism, I mean, really, this is a sense in which veganism and abortion are similar or are comparable, right? With veganism, you would see incremental progress on that chart. It wouldn't just be a binary on-off switch. It's not like, oh, we used to have slavery and now slavery is abolished. You would be seeing the progress towards the goal as you move closer and closer. Same with abortion, right? It's not like overnight people would decide abortions are immoral and it would disappear. But if their movement were successful, you would be seeing declining abortion rates in the chart. And maybe you'd even see dips corresponding to particular campaigns. Like, oh, that was the year they did this disruption campaign. I mean, it's, again, abortion activists do the same stuff. They block access to the hospital. They block access to the abortion clinic. And then people can't get there, like they will physically obstruct. They'll do this kind of thing. But the charts don't show progress. The charts don't show that we're winning. The charts don't show anything positive, in terms of the progress of veganism movement whatsoever. Okay. All right. This is real. We're going to say, when you look at and you approve of these protests by vegan activists in England, where they were accomplishing their protest by blocking roads, having an economic effect. Okay. Some people are morally opposed to vaccines. How would you feel if they right now exercise their opposition to vaccines by blocking the roads? Some people support Hamas, a terrorist organization. Quite a lot of people on the left wing, paradoxically, support Hamas. How would you feel if there were Muslim fundamentalists or Muslim terrorist groups, and their form of activism is blocking the roads strategically to shut down what their political opponents want to do or need to? How would you feel if they were Catholics morally opposed to abortion who were shutting down the roads? If you do not believe that in a democratic society, this method of activism, this method of protest is permissible for everyone, then you believe it's permissible for no one. Okay? And if you set the precedent that you can get away with this, if this is okay for Wayne Seong and Direct Action Network, if this is okay for vegans, if this is acceptable for us, then it's acceptable for the redneck, fascist, right-wing extremists, then it's acceptable for the Muslim extremists, then it's acceptable for every other fringe ideology. Because in case you haven't figured it out, veganism is a fringe ideology. I will just repeat, we will never have the numbers. We will never have the level of public support. We will never have the level of organization or money behind us. We'll never have the institutional backing that already the anti-abortion movement has. We are a tiny fringe movement compared to the anti-abortion movement. It's not good. I knew this young woman. Every time I talked to her, the last several times I talked to her, my message to her was, I don't want you to end up in prison. Don't do this. I got to change your way of thinking about vegan activism, environmentalism, animal rights, and, even if she doesn't end up in prison, right? There was a real sense in which she was driving herself crazy. She believed impossible things, and she lived her life in a tense, anxious, awful, sense of moral contradiction at all times, right? That's where the violence is coming from. And she told me about an incident where she was driving down the road in her car, and she had some trivial conflict with a guy on the sidewalk. I think it was about parking. And she stopped the car, got out of the car, ran down the street, and punched him in the back of the head as hard as she could. She leapt up and punched this guy in the back of the head. So this is someone who had, you can go to jail for that. Could also kill someone. You don't know your own strength and you don't know the other person's weakness, right? Like, you don't know what the consequences are. You get to choose your actions. You don't get to choose other people's reactions. You don't get to choose the consequences of your actions. And yeah, also that guy could have turned around and punched her back, which he didn't, apparently. She could have been very badly hurt directly in return. This is someone dealing with all these things. So, I kind of had my eye on her, and I was talking to her, and again, it's something I was dealing with in my YouTube channel a lot. I am not going to endorse methods of activism that I think they're ineffective. I think they're counterproductive. I think they're an insult to democracy. I think they're an insult to your intelligence. I think they're a waste of your time, right? And I don't want you to put yourself in jail. And that story ends. She got pregnant and had a kid. That's the truth. You know what? All of that bullshit, all of her commitment to vegan activism just disappeared because she got pregnant and had a kid. Now she had other priorities in life. And I don't really know what kind of a mother she turned out to be. We haven't kept in touch since then. I wish her the best. But that was how she stayed out of prison. And I remember she kept it up. She really believed. She was writing back to me and saying, oh, no, she would justify that, like, oh, no, like burning down a slaughterhouse, like firebomb attacks, like real terrorism that's burning up. She really believed, she really believed this was effective. She really believed this is the future. All right, guys, I got more to say, but I think I'm going to put a pin in it and call that a video. Politics is only partly about being right, or being wrong, right? Politics begins with and ends with human beings. All the world's history and all the world's riddles, all the world's truth and all the world's lies have to fit into the span of one human lifetime. You have to bring these things down to a human scale and stop thinking about the future of your movement in terms of an abstract truth that you have to serve. Like, the truth is that so many millions of animals are dying every month. This is this great truth and this great crime, and now you become beholden to it. No, the truth is you're a human being. The truth is that you have to live a whole and meaningful life, and you shouldn't put yourself in prison for the sake of the abstract ideal of democracy in Hong Kong. And you shouldn't put yourself in prison for the abstract ideal of democracy in Myanmar. And you shouldn't put yourself in prison for the abstract ideal of a vegan diet. And there are counterexamples that these people don't talk about. They talk about the end of the Vietnam War, which they're completely ignorant of. They don't know why the Vietnam War ended when it did and how it did. They talk about the protests against the war in Iraq. They talk about the Arab Spring, right? None of those protests changed the world the way Voltaire did when he wrote Candide. Okay. Voltaire didn't really know anything about slavery. He didn't really know anything about torture. He didn't really know anything about war. He didn't really have any deep issue. But he was able to write a book where he poured a lot of feeling into it. And he really gets it across to you that he cares. He gets across to you that this is not fit for human beings. This life that's become normal in Europe at that time. People being tortured to death as heretics in Spain and Portugal, slavery in the New World, all of these horrors, and what's come to be seen as normal and even honorable in wars within Europe. He just poured his heart out in this book, in this very poorly written book. It's a terrible book, right? He just poured his heart out and wrote a book and told you how he felt, and he told you how much he cared. And it changed the world, okay? It changed the world in a way that none of these protests have, and that none of them can, and none of them ever will. In the year 2020, Black Lives Matter protesters, they burned down a Wendy's. They burned down a Wendy's chicken and meat restaurant. I do not approve of burning down a restaurant in the name of veganism, and I don't believe in it in the name of ending police brutality. And it's not because I love Wendy's hamburgers or because I support private enterprise or, if I believed that burning down every Wendy's restaurant in America would actually reform policing that would actually provide a more moral, a more responsible, a less violent police force, of course, I'd be willing to do it. Okay? How stupid do you have to be to think that burning down a Wendy's restaurant is going to bring about police reform? And it hasn't happened yet. This is now May 28th, 2021. It didn't work, guys. That protest movement, it didn't get the results. It didn't get the outcomes. There hasn't been any reform. There isn't anything to show. The black people who were killed in those protests, they've stayed dead. They're dead forever. The buildings, the whole city blocks that were burnt down, the stores that were looted and destroyed, right? That damage is done and it hasn't been repaired yet. It hasn't been painted over yet, right? We have the negative consequences. We have no positive outcomes to show for it, okay? And the problem is we live in a society where the majority of people, the majority, left or right, vegan or meat eater, pro-abortion or anti-abortion, the vast majority of people believe in violent, disruptive protest activism. The vast majority of people really are stupid enough to think that burning down a Wendy's restaurant in a riot is the way to save the planet.